Hey folks, I'm Chris, and I'm your Commander Mechanic, here with yet another tune-up. But before we get started, I wanted to remind everybody that we're now officially affiliated with our Canadian retailer of choice, Hairy Tarantula. If you want to help support the channel by picking up singles or sealed product, head on over and use the promo code CMDR Space Mechanic at checkout. Now let's see what's in the workshop today. This week's a little different since we've had 3 viewers submit their Illuna Apex of Wishes deck. We'll look at a general overview of some of the issues, challenges, and deck building considerations common across all 3 of these lists. A big thanks to viewers Jake, Antoine, and Trilemma for submitting. All 3 viewers mentioned some common issues, namely the imposed deck building restrictions of including as many mutators and mutate hits as possible serves to compromise the overall consistency of a build. Well, let's take a look at why, starting with what our commander does. Illuna is a mutating teamer beast elemental dinosaur, that's a mouthful, that lets us cheat permanents into play while we mutate. Being a 6/6 flying trampler for 6 is not bad at all, but we really start to get value the moment we mutate. This means we want to enable mutate as often as possible, and include as few non-land permanents as is acceptable, apart from the ones we want to be flipping into with Illuna's ability. It's going to feel bad mutating into Illuna and flipping a Simic Signet off the top, or a Llanowar Elves. So each user has tried to build around that, minimizing the chance to flip a miss. Now, all 3 users have taken a significantly different approach to their lists. Jake goes all in on big, splashy permanents like Zendikar Resurgent, Jin Gitaxias Core Augur, and Mind's Dilation, but includes smaller creatures with useful abilities to mutate onto. Mutating an Illuna onto a Darksteel Mirror for an indestructible commander is a very good strategy, and even getting Illuna on a Kiora's Follower is great, but these feel pretty bad if you flip into them. Antoine minimizes misses by utilizing a polymorph style strategy, making non-human tokens to mutate Illuna onto in order to jam nothing but big bomb creatures in the list. The issue with this strategy is that Antoine has cut out all mana rocks in favor of one-time ramp spells, having only 2 enchantments and 1 planeswalker in the deck apart from big bomby creatures. And lastly, Trilemma has gone Sarkin crazy, with dragons and planeswalkers in their list, including some permanents that could be considered misses when mutating Illuna, like Commander Sphere or Sakura Tribe Elder. But everything else in the deck is a dragon, a Sarkin, or a mutator, so consistency on being able to mutate is great. So really, we can see how each list has its strengths and weaknesses. But common to each list is a higher than average curve, close to or exceeding 4, thanks to the big bomby permanents we're hoping to flip into. The issue is that, if we can't or aren't allowed to mutate Illuna, or flip into a miss of a permanent, we have to start paying more and more mana. Illuna gets expensive after just the first cast. Getting an Illuna flip and hitting a small creature is rough, a real feels bad. You end up not getting your value back. And even with a saturation of creatures with mutate, you risk flipping into a creature with mutate as your free permanent. Some of these, like Sea Dasher Octopus or a Porcuparrot, can be real bad beats. It's because of this that I really like Antoine's approach, where you're muting onto a token with Illuna. It means that you have to jump through some hoops in order to mutate repeatedly, but it means you flip a higher quality of permanent when you do get that trigger. It's because of this that I'd recommend cutting anything that doesn't immediately impact the board or present a massive threat to the table. I'd leave in Soul Ring in most cases as the only non-threat permanent, because that kind of ramp is typically necessary. There are a few aspects of these builds that we'll want to consider. Bounce, so we can return Illuna to our hand. Ramp in the form of spells to ensure we can consistently mutate Illuna. And big threats we may draw. And top deck manipulation so that we can better control what we end up hitting with our mutate triggers. If we're going to be making tokens to put Illuna on, we'll need to factor that in too. Antoine's list features token producers like Dragon Fodder and Forbidden Friendship, and even Saproling Migration. I do appreciate the inclusion of alternatives like turning lands into creatures as well. There are some Awaken spells in the list like Scatter to the Winds, but we could also look at Planeswalkers like Nissa Who Shakes the World as both a ramp option and a creature producer. Nissa, Voice of Zendikar, also makes plant tokens every turn, which we can use to our advantage. The downside is, of course, that we may flip into these Planeswalkers, which doesn't exactly make sense with Illuna. Cards like Man Lands are great for this option too, especially if they don't cost too much to activate. Antoine's list has Raging Ravine, Wandering Fumarole, and Lumbering Falls, but they cost 4 mana to activate. Fairy Conclave is much closer to where we want to be. So on this line, Blinkmoth Nexus and Inkmoth Nexus, for instance, could be good includes. But beware, an option like Mutavault is all creature types and therefore a human. We can't mutate onto a Mutavault. If we're not including other mutate creatures in the deck, then we'll really need ways to get Illuna back to our hand repeatedly. This is tough since we'll want to shy away from permanents that do this. I'd personally include 2, Crystal Shard and Portal of Sanctuary, on top of some one-time bounce effects. Bounce will end up being one of our main sources of removal since it crosses off synergies across what we're looking for. Runaway Together gets both Illuna and another creature back to hand. Evacuation returns all creatures to hand at instant speed, leaving you poised to mutate on your turn. And even Mystic Confluence works for us here, letting us bounce Illuna and other creatures, or counter a spell, or draw cards. Lots of great instant speed options. For ramp, I want to be consistent. Let's include the good 2 and 3 mana ramp options. I see most lists are running 3 visits and Nature's Lore, and Farseek is perfect to include to help with our color fixing. There are some options for lands that produce multiple mana too, but they're on the pricier side, which we'll explore in upgrades. As for the big threats, there are great flips across all 3 lists, from Praetors like Vorinclex, to dinosaurs like Apex Altasaur, to dragons like Atarka World Render. I don't think we're short on options. Again, there are some pricier options I want to recommend in upgrades, but the goal should be to stick a threat that the table needs to answer. Finally, top deck manipulation. Again, we want options that will put cards from our hand on top of our library so we can choose what we're polymorphing into. Brainstorm is a great option. Dreamcast is another great choice. And on a little bit of a pricier side, there's Scroll Rack too. But our real strength with this build will be redundancy. Illuna won't be the only way we can turn a creature token into a beefy beater. We can have spells like Classic Polymorph in the list, which this archetype is typically named after. This list lets us target a token and flip over a Chroma Angel of Wrath. But there's also Transmogrify, a straight color-shifted polymorph that works the exact same way. Or Reality Scramble, which even has Retrace, so we can use it again. Luca Coppercoat Outcast has a minus loyalty ability that provides the same function. And there's the instant speed 2-for-1 of Divergent Transformations, which can net us 2 of our big threats at the end of an opponent's turn for the cost of just 2 of our tokens. If we really want to pump this deck up, there are a few pricier options that I would recommend. Ancient Tomb is a stellar way to ramp on a land. While it only makes colorless mana, it can be a liability since it deals damage, but it allows us to cast a turn 2 Cultivate or Kodama's Reach, which is pretty ideal. Along the same lines, if we're going wide with token generation as a backup plan, Gaia's Cradle costs an arm and a leg, but whoof, will it ever ramp you quickly. If we want to beef up our top deck manipulation, we could include Jace the Mind Sculptor, who will brainstorm for us every turn and can even bounce out an Illuna Mutate back to our hand if we need to use it again. And lastly, for threats, I would consider some real game enders. Blightsteel Colossus is a massive, indestructible threat that demands to be answered or players just start losing. But it is because of Infect, and we know how contentious Infect is in Commander, so use at your own discretion. With all of this in mind, let's take a look at the list. This list is a cleaned up version of Antoine's Polymorph style list, relying on making creature tokens or man lands and mutating Illuna onto them, or using one of the many redundant Polymorph effects to turn a token into a Phyrexian Praetor or an Eldrazi. I've made some small tweaks, mainly adding more efficient man lands, some more consistent token generation, including Krenko's Command, Curious Herd, and Artifact Mutation, and streamlining our ramp pieces to 2 mana. Farseek, Nature's Lore, and 3 Visits grab us non-basic typed lands, so I've cut the cards that grab basics. Again, mainly because the original list only had about 10 basics to grab from. I like this list a lot because while the commander synergizes with the game plan, there's enough redundancy that you don't need to ever cast or mutate Illuna. With a decent hand, you could be looking at one of your dragons or leviathans in play by turn 3 or 4. That's not too shabby. I hope you like some of the changes to your list, team. Please ensure to let us all know in the comments how you've managed to tweak your deck. And everyone else, let us know what you would continue to do to improve this list. But as always, folks, until next time, good luck and have fun. And a special thanks to our patrons, without whom this content wouldn't be possible. A special shout out to our Lodestone Golems, Ben Frayne, Sterling Langford, and Will Briggs, and our Metalwork Colossi, Austin Charlotte, Charles Olson, JD, Matthew Chandler, and Ben Shackelford. Thank you, all of you. You make this possible.